Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to create 3 cards using this 6x6 paper pad from Prima called Nature's Garden. This is part of my design team kit from KS4U. I'll put a link to their 2 stores in the description box below this video. Also, just a quick reminder that if you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would click that subscribe button and then click the bell next to the subscribe button so you're notified each time I upload a new video. We'll start with this card. The base for all of my cards are going to be the same. I'm making some square cards today and they're 5 1/4 inches square, so I'm using 240 GSM smooth white cardstock to make the bases. I'm cutting them 5 1/4 inches by 10 1/2 inches. And then I use my scoreboard to score it at 5 1/4 inches and fold my card in half, thereby making my 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. I chose 3 pages from my paper pad and I only end up using 2 of them. One of them is this dark one. This is going to be my background. I'm going to cut that 5 1/8 inches square. My second layer of pattern paper is this lighter one and I'm going to cut that so it's 4 3/4 inches square. I've taken a 6-inch doily from my stash and I'm going to trim that down so that it covers about half or maybe 2/3 of the front of my card. I wanted to add some of this beautiful lace that was in my kit, so I got it out of the packet and then trimmed a piece of the darker pattern paper that I used on the background. I trimmed that so that it was 2 1/4 inches wide to go behind that lace to make it stand out from the background. Here I'm just trying to decide how I'm going to create my area to put my greeting. I play around with a few different ideas, but I end up going with using a piece of the dark that I used for the background. I cut that to 1 1/4 inches by 3 inches. Then I put a piece of white cardstock on top of that, that's 1 1/8 by 2 7/8. Then a piece of the lighter coloured cardstock, which is 1 inch by 2 3/4, and then another layer of white which is 7/8 of an inch by 2 5/8 of an inch. So I'm basically decreasing 1/8 of an inch in height and 1/8 of an inch in width for each layer as I come up. Now that I've got all of my papers cut to size and have an idea of how I'm going to place them all, I go ahead and distress the edges of all of the papers and ink around them with my KS4U black ink cube. Now I'm using my Prima distress tool here, but if you don't have one you can do the same thing with a pair of scissors. You just swipe the blade of your scissors along the edge of your paper and you'll get a very similar effect. I also have another tool that does the same job, and this one is a Tim Holtz tool. It's just a little circle and it's got lots of little divots in it where there are blades, and you can use those to do exactly the same thing. I tend to pick up my Prima one because it's got a handy handle on it and it's very easy to use, and the blade on it is nice and sharp, so it gets through the job quite quickly. So I'm going to distress the edges of all of the papers, ink around all of the papers, attach my double-sided tape to the back of each piece of paper. I then attach my pattern papers to my card base. I use glue to attach the doily. I'm using art glitter glue. I don't cover the outside edges of the doily, I just put spots here and there, and once I've got that attached to my card base, I will trim off the overhang. When it comes time to attach my lace, I use glue to do that. I move it up a little bit so I can get a nice straight edge on both ends. So once that's stuck in place, I use my scissors to then trim off the other edge that's overhanging. I wanted to cover over the left hand edge of the lace, so I cut a strip of the light pattern paper so that it's 3/4 of an inch wide by 5 1/4 inches long. I give that the same treatment that I gave all of the other papers, that is, I distress the edges and ink the edges, and then I attach that on top of the lace. Because I'm sticking that thin strip of paper on top of the lace, I use both double-sided tape and glue to attach that. I go ahead and assemble my greeting cluster in the same way, just using double-sided tape. Once that's ready, I attach it to the front of my card. Previously I'd used this Heartfelt Creation stamp to stamp and heat emboss with black embossing powder this flower. I had used some of it, but some of it was left over, some offcuts, so I've decided to use those on this card. I just got them out of my scraps box. I'm attaching them on top of the lace. There's two little pieces. One, I actually stamped it on pattern paper, but one's got some bluish colour and one's basically white. So I used some glue to attach them on top of the lace. I also found a white flower from my stash that I wanted to add. I think it's an old Prima one. I'm not exactly sure because I take everything out of its packaging, which is probably not a good idea, but that's the way it is at the moment. So I've attached that to my card front using some glue so that overlaps the heat embossed flowers. Time now to add my greeting. This greeting is off of the barcode at the bottom of the pattern paper. When I come across these things, I just trim them off and put them in a folder so that when I'm looking for a greeting, I've got one handy. I've distressed and inked around the edges of that, and now I'm just attaching it using my glue. I thought I'd use my offcuts to decorate the inside of the card a little. So I'm using 2 strips of the dark paper and 1 thin strip of the light paper. I'm going to use my glue, first of all I'll ink around the edges of each piece and then use my glue to attach them. So that completes our first card for today. So on to our second card now. As I said earlier, all of my card bases are the same for this series. They're all 5 1/4 inches square. So I'm going to select a couple of papers to use on this card. I trimmed the paper that is going to be my background down to 5 1/8 by 5 1/8 inches. At this stage I had planned on putting a strip of white cardstock down on the front of my cardstock, so I trimmed this piece down, so I can't remember how wide it was. I think it was about 3 inches wide maybe by the 5 1/8, and I was going to put that there, but I changed my mind. I chose a couple of offcuts of this pinkish sort of paper to go on top of my white, so I trimmed them down so that they were 5 1/8 inches long and until they had a straight edge. It didn't matter to me how wide they were because I just planned on overlapping them to get the coverage I wanted. So this is where the change of mind happened. I decided to use that strip of white cardstock and my magnolia die, it's a scalloped edge die, and cut 2 strips of that scalloped edge. Cut another piece of white cardstock that was 3 inches by 5 1/8 and then used my liquid glue to attach those scalloped die cut pieces to the edge of the cardstock. I then used my glue to attach those 2 scraps that I had trimmed down. I attached them to the white cardstock with the scalloped edges that I'd just attached so that they filled in that middle section. Now I'm going to create my layers for my greeting to sit on. I'm going to start with the blue paper. It's going to be 1 1/4 inches by 5 1/8. Then I'm going to do a piece of white cardstock that is 1 inch by 5 1/8. Then a piece of the pattern paper that I've used on the background, which is going to be 7/8 of an inch by 5/8. And then another layer of white that is 5/8 of an inch by 5 1/8 of an inch. In a previous kit I had got this Hero Art stamp and this Ranger's Embossing Antiquities Cobalt embossing powder, and I had stamped and heat embossed this flower and fussy cut that out, and I have used some white cardstock and this die to make this spiky white flower to decorate the front of my card. I wanted to pop this centre panel up on my card, so I got some chipboard offcuts and trimmed them down to fit and used my glue to attach the chipboard to the back of that centre panel. Now that I have all of my elements ready, I use my black ink cube and ink around the edge of all of it. Time now to start assembling my card. I start with my greeting panel. I use my glue to layer each paper on top of the other, starting from the biggest and working my way up to the smallest. Next I attached my background paper and then my panel with the chipboard on the back. When I'm attaching my layers on cards, I alternate between double-sided tape and glue. Neither one is a preference, but I'm finding that I am using glue a bit more than tape these days, probably because it's easier and you can wriggle your paper around before it actually sticks in place. I'm going to use a piece of cheesecloth on this card. Some people call it cheesecloth, some people say gauze. I think it's got a few different names, but I just cut a piece and then give it a bit of a stretch and pull it out of shape so it looks a bit shabby chic. I am going to add a little bit of chipboard to each end of my greeting panel because the centre panel is mounted on chipboard, and if I don't, well then those ends are going to just be hanging in mid-air. So I use my glue to attach a fine strip of chipboard, as I said, to the ends of the greeting panel. Once that's done, I apply a coat of glue and attach that to the card front on top of the gauze so that it actually holds that in place. I used glue to attach my 2 handmade flowers. The greeting for this card is Happy Birthday that I have generated on my computer. I generate a whole sheet of various greetings in various fonts and various sizes so that when I'm looking for a greeting I've got one on hand. I trimmed that down to size, ink around the edges and attach that on top of my greeting panel. For the inside of the card, I just chose another sheet of paper from the pad, trimmed that down to 5 1/8 by 5 1/8, inked around the edge of it and attached it to the inside of the card. So that finishes the second card for today. Now that I look at it, I think that blue flower is too bright, and I think I'll take it off and replace it with a different one. On to our third card for the day. Once again, same size, 5 1/4 inches square, and I've chosen 2 papers to go on this. I've cut the background paper at 5 1/8 inch square, and the blue, which is going to be the top layer, is 4 3/4 inches square. I've pulled a few things out there that I think I might use on the card. I don't really have a plan, I just thought these might be handy. So I trimmed this corrugated card. Well, it's actually a piece of old box that's had the paper peeled off the top level. I trimmed that down so that it's square or straight on the edges. And then I start playing around with what I want to actually add to the card, trying different things here and there to see what I like and what I don't think suits. I end up liking this as a starting point. I've got this bow die and I don't think I've ever used it, so I cut the largest bow out of white cardstock. I wanted to change the colour of my corrugated board and my bow and my chipboard frame, so I used my Tattered Angels chalkboard white to first of all cover up the colour of the chipboard and the cardboard, and then I used Dilution's vibrant turquoise ink spray to colour all of them actually, the frame, the corrugated board and the bow. And then just to give it a bit of sparkle, I used Artiste spritzing ink in gold, just a light coat of that. I then set these aside to dry. While I was waiting for those to dry, I distressed and inked the edges of my pattern paper. I then went ahead and attached those to my card base using double-sided tape. I used glue to put my little bow together. Now that I look at it, I think I have made one before, and I just love the way they look. They're so cute. I think I might have to leave this on my desk for a while to remind me to use it more often. I'm going to use some cheesecloth on this card as well, so I cut a piece and stretch it a bit out of shape, and then applied glue to the back of my chipboard frame and used that glue to attach both the frame and the cheesecloth to the card front. Time now to add my sliver of corrugated cardstock. I use glue to attach that to the card front, but I trim the length off first before I do that. Here we go again with the change of heart. I had a look in my stash and I had this tissue paper flower that I had made, I think it must be at least 5 years ago, and it's just circles of tissue paper scrunched up and layered on top of each other and secured with a brad. So I'm going to use that one instead of the fabric flower. It's a little bit bigger and I think the colour really looks good on there, so I used glue to attach that to the bottom left hand corner of the frame. So at this point I just happened to push that piece of corrugated card out of the way, and I thought, well, why not add that onto the bottom? So that's what I did. I attached that to the bottom section of the card using some glue. I wanted to add a little bit of bling, so I have got this packet of Say It with crystals in what I thought was a pretty good match of colour, so I applied one to each of the top corners of the chipboard frame and one to the middle of the bow. I also attached the bow to the bottom right section of the frame. The greeting for this card is Happy Birthday, another one of my computer generated greetings. I cut a piece of the blue paper to 1 1/8 by 1 5/8. I inked around the edge of that paper, or actually I distressed around it and then inked around it, and then just inked around the white greeting paper and layered those on top of each other and then attached them on top of the cheesecloth. I attached a piece of chipboard to the greeting before I attached that to the card. On the inside, once again, I just trimmed down a few of the scraps to 5 1/8 of an inch, inked around the edges, and then attached them to the inside of the card so they weren't plain inside. So they are my 3 cards for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up. I will have links to craft supplies for you in the description box below, so don't forget to check them out. Thank you for watching my video today, and I hope you can join me when I post my next video. Bye.